I was sad as I walked out the door. I was leaving the love of my life, Millie, for an entire week. She was my most dependent, reliable life partner. I was going to miss my dog. My friends owned a boat on the coast of Maine where they took people out for a week at a time on cruises, and they had asked me to be the naturalist for the week. I'm a marine biologist. And orientation night, I hop on the boat, go to the stern where Captain Dennis is, and within 5 minutes he goes, "So you did that SEA sailing program in undergraduate?" I was like, yeah, Dennis, I did. And he's like, "And you studied marine ecology, right?" And I'm like, "Dennis, that's why you hired me for this trip." And he's like, "You have a lot in common with Tom. Tom's single, you should date Tom." Now, who the hell is Tom? And I'd gone through a breakup a few months prior with someone that I didn't have very much in common with. And I was fine. I had spent the 4th of July watching all the Twilight movies in a row with a couple bottles of wine, and Millie, my domestic life partner. It was fine. But some of my friends didn't feel that way. One even said, she's like, "Well, what are you going to do for the winter? You're not going to go back to your ex, are you?" And I was like, "Well, I have central heating. I didn't know that man heating was a requirement too." So back on the boat, Captain Dennis is like, "Well, Tom's the first mate." And within 15 seconds, as if out of a sitcom, this handsome sailor in a dirty t-shirt and blonde hair and blue eyes hops up on deck and he's like, "Hi, I'm Tom." And I'm like, "Hi." And I immediately wish that I had had my legs shaven in that moment. But, handsome guys are usually assholes, and he's probably an arrogant one if he used to do science. But it's true. It's fucking true. And, we probably have some things in common. Marine biology is a small world, ironically, given how big the ocean is. So the next day, first day of sailing, I walk up to him at the front of the boat, and we start talking, and we do actually have a lot of friends in common, and he's actually pretty nice. And it turns out there's 2 very strange places we'd both been a few years apart. One was the remote tundra of Alaska, a year apart. We'd both gone. And we both sailed from Tahiti to Marquesas to Hawaii on the same boat across the Pacific 3 years apart. And the SEA sailing program Dennis had mentioned. It's kind of weird. And I was like, shit. This guy is handsome. We have things in common. This is terrible. Because in my experience, guys who are handsome and we have things in common and then I date them, it's a disaster. I have 4 exes who I had tons in common with. And the next woman they dated after me, they all married. And these women were all very petite, very dark hair, were well-spoken, never made dirty sex jokes, never a hair out of place. And I was the exact opposite of all of those things. So I was really good at showing guys exactly what they didn't want from their life partner, and usually at the expense of my heart. But that night, I talked to Dennis and the crew, and we all want to play Rummy, a card game, and they send me to go fetch Tom from the forecastle or the crew quarters, just kind of a hole at the front of the boat. And I peer down, and there's Tom in his underwear playing the bagpipes. And, I've 100% determined now that there's evidence of his complete physical beauty. And also, he's an extreme nerd because he plays the bagpipes, which is a very difficult instrument, which is also very attractive to me at this point in time. But instead of, commenting on any of these things, I go, "Oh, hey, Tom, you want to, play cards with us? We're going to play Rummy." He's like, "Oh, tonight I have to practice my bagpipe." Okay. But the next night, Tuesday, he comes down to play cards with us, and he sits down right next to me. And he has this big, bright smile, and he laughs at all of my sex jokes, especially my "that's what she said" jokes, because they had previously been banned from the boat until I showed up that week. And we continued talking after the game. We go up on deck, and there's a bunch of owl calls, and Tom knows all of them. And then we talk about the stars, and he knows all of those too. And then we started talking about scuba diving, because he's done hundreds of dives, and he was a marine biologist after all. But then I started talking about my PhD program, and I used to be a scuba diver, but about 6 months into my program, I got diagnosed with a heart condition, and I had a pacemaker implanted in my chest at the age of 25. And I could no longer scuba dive in a diving lab where I did my PhD for 5 years. And he got very quiet and very serious and very focused on me when I told my story. And when I finished, he begins telling me about how when he was 24, he had been diagnosed with testicular cancer. And he'd gone through 2 very painful surgeries, one in which he'd been disemboweled. He spoke very quickly, and he was very emotional, and he said he hadn't really been able to talk to the crew about it that summer. He felt like he could talk to me. And at the end of the conversation, and we're going to bed, and he goes to give me this big Portland, Oregonian hug, and I'm from New England, and Puritans, right? And I just met this guy like 3 days ago, and I don't hug people I just met 3 days ago. But I also really like him. I really like him as a person now, not just eye candy. And I don't know if he's interested in me. If you're interested in a girl, would you really tell them you only have one testicle? And I don't know what to think. And the rest of the trip, I'm falling for Tom more and more, and I have no idea if he likes me as a friend more or anything. And all I want to do is escape the boat. And Friday comes along, and I hop off as soon as it touches land, because I got to go get Millie, because Millie and I need to catch up really badly. And as I walk down the dock, I feel someone staring at me, and I turn around, and there's Tom looking at me like he's never going to see me again. And I'm like, "Okay, Skylar, play it cool." And I just go, "What?" And walk off. But 2 hours later, I get a text message from him being like, "Oh, it's so great sailing with you, and we're all going to the fair tomorrow. Do you want to come to the fair with us?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'll come to the fair with you. Whatever." And we go to the fair the next day, and I mentioned while we're all together, all the crew together, me at the fair, that I have a radio show on Sundays. It's a community radio show, so no one listens. And Tom's like, "Well, I'd love to listen to your radio show." And I roll my eyes. I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And so during my radio show the next day, I'm texting in, and I'm like, "Oh, so are you listening?" And he's like, "I can't find a radio." And I was like, "What idiot in this day and age can't find a fucking radio?" And I was like, "Well, I'll reenact it for you later." And he goes, "How about tonight?" And I just totally freeze. He just asked me out on a date, and this flood of fear, of heartbroken relationships, all just comes boiling into my brain and heart and lungs, and I just feel totally, totally paralyzed. And I take this deep breath, and I type a casual "sure," as I take the chance to show Tom exactly what he doesn't want. And on our date, we go to watch the lunar eclipse on top of Mount Batty, which overlooks the harbor where we met. And at the end of the date, we walk down the mountain hand in hand. And 13 full moons later, we walk hand in hand to a lighthouse overlooking the bay where we met. And we got married. And Tom is still the best risk I've ever taken. Thank you.